and some other one?
It'd be greeting, because I'm a talker, so I usually greet people.
You're pretty friendly?
Yeah.
Okay, I would agree with that.
My mom always said I never knew a stranger, but just hear
Okay.
into my adulthood.
That's good. That's good.
People come up to me and tell me their problems at the grocery store, don't even know them.
So you're a burden bearer, is what you're saying. You're a burden bearer, okay.
It just is on your head somewhere.
All right. And one of the reasons we're asking this, the question at the end of class that we got at the very end was, what do you believe your part is in the work that this church does? So how can you serve in one of these ways? Or what's a way that you would like to learn how to serve in? More hospitality? Okay. Yeah. And we talked about more and more, like this church has it going on. I know several other churches across the country that has it going on, where because of where the church building is, and we're in a large metropolitan area, people are traveling further. So like the very first church I preached at when Anna and I were married, just newly married, was in Indiana, but it was right outside of Chicago. And it was one of those little bedroom communities from the 1940s and 50s. And the church was built on a residential lot in this little neighborhood. And when it was built, like half the church members lived in that neighborhood. And so people were walking to the church building. What we're doing here at Twin Creeks is the opposite of that. I mean, you've got people driving from all over the place to come in. And so that affects the capacity for hospitality. Like in those little neighborhoods, you'd go to someone's house and walk there in 5 minutes, and you'd have lunch and whatever. But now, if we're going to do that with each other, we grab a meal out at a restaurant after services, or we have to plan a big get-together a month or two out. It just takes more planning. So it makes hospitality something to troubleshoot, right? You have to be very intentional with it. Any of the others?
Teaching is great.
I was gonna plug that.
I
Yeah.
wish we could have more people that would feel like
Yeah.
they could teach or would help and learn to teach.
Yes.
Because we're sadly needing those.
And we should put down on this list. This was the list my friend put together years ago when he made this material. But under teaching, we mentioned it last week, is assistance. So like Megan has been helping out in some of the classes. And there's a focus, in 2025, we're going to have a focus on teaching and trying to provide some training opportunities and trying to bring some people along to feel more comfortable teaching.
It is definitely something you have to get out of your comfort zone, because people worry that they don't want to teach the wrong thing. And
Yeah.
they don't, it's hard when you're teaching, because you want to make sure you're not teaching the wrong thing.
Sure.
But we do have a lot of people, several ladies that help. Like,
Yeah.
We have work days.
Oh, man, yeah.
Ladies come down and help at cut and do all that.
But you still have to have someone in the room with the kids.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is before, to
Yeah.
plan ahead.
Right.
We do have ladies that do that,
Yeah.
that don't teach or can't teach, which is great, which is a great help.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
in that capacity. And we have
Training and
ladies that do
equipping.
that.
Training and equipping more. And then for us guys, there seems to be this apprehension of teaching an adult class. They'd rather teach a high school class, which we need good high school teachers. But we want to help guys get comfortable teaching in here. Or for some reason, the big spooky auditorium. Like, it's not really that big of a difference, but there's a mental thing about teaching in the auditorium. So we want to equip, especially through 2025, equip more people to teach. So be thinking about that list from the last week and a half, about how you could help our local church with some of these roles. All right. Now, let's talk about Matthew 10. Let's turn over to Matthew 10. And really, we're just going to study the chapter today. We're just going to read down a couple verses at a time. And see what that text has to say about evangelism. So the introduction at the top of the page, Jesus' instructions for evangelism. Serving and teaching others comes with many challenges. We get tired. We get hurt. We don't always know when to move on. We don't always know what to say. Jesus is aware of this. In this great chapter, we see Jesus encouraging, warning, and instructing some disciples he was preparing to send out teaching and serving. Though not every detail is the same for us, there are many wonderful things to learn about the work we long to do for our Savior. Let's explore and see what we find. Below are 4 areas that need to be given careful attention when it comes to evangelism. Deficiency in these areas is one reason we often find ourselves not doing as much as we know we should when it comes to sharing the gospel with others. Think about how this interaction between Jesus and his disciples teaches us something about each of these areas. And the 4 areas we've been focusing on are care, consciousness, courage, and craft. All right, so would someone like to read verses 1 through 4 of chapter 10?
And when he had called his 12 disciples to him, he gave them power over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal all kinds of sickness and all kinds of disease. Now the names of the 12 apostles are these: first, Simon, who was called Peter, and Andrew his brother, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James the son of Alphaeus, and Lebbaeus, whose surname was Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanite, and Judas Iscariot, who also betrayed him.
Perfect. That's perfect. Okay, so the question at the bottom of this, bottom of that section, do you believe these individuals, the apostles, taught in the same way or sounded the same? Jenny says no. Ellen says no. Why do you think it's no? Okay, so every individual is different. That's true. Besides that, so let's play off of that. What's different between these 12 men right off the bat? They have different occupations. Some of them do. We know a lot of them were fishermen. They're Galilean, right? So they're all coming from the same general area. They're all Jewish. But oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure, different personalities. Okay, so if you're in a Bible class and someone asks a question, out of those 12, Peter would be like, I know. He might not even raise his hand. He'd just talk. Okay. What else do we know about some of these guys that would be different?
They were brothers.
Some of them were brothers. Look, I taught my very first Bible class when I was 16 at a church that had 30 people, and 8 of them were my family. And they put me in the teenage class, which meant I was teaching my brother that was 5 years younger than me. So I was 16 and he was 11. And then I had 2 13-year-old brothers in there. Guess how that class went?
Not well.
Once. It went once. I was like, turn over to Matthew chapter 10. And one of the 13-year-olds was like, make me. And we were in class, and I was all official, and I was standing there, and I'm like, no, turn over there. And he's like, I'm not gonna. And I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go out to the auditorium and get mom. Like, what do I do? So family dynamics. Okay, you got family dynamics. That's not true with all of them. Okay, there's another big difference, especially between 2. Elaborate on that, Keenan.
Well, one of them was a zealot, which he was very anti-Roman and all of the authorities that they had.
Okay. And then you had Matthew the tax collector, who was working for the Romans, right? So those 2 guys might, especially the tax collector, I would imagine would struggle in the early days of being a disciple of Jesus as he tried to explain to the people he was talking to that he wasn't all pro-Rome anymore. And so he'd have to get over that hurdle before he could connect with them, right? So his classes were like, hey, guys, my name is Matthew. Hey, Matthew. And he's like, I used to be a tax collector. I'm so sorry. Sorry for robbing you guys. Sorry for like whatever. And he would have to say all of that before he could start, right? And imagine being Simon the Zealot, and he starts, and his buddies all walk in, and he's like, I don't know these guys anymore. And it's not all about Israel and reinstituting things, and he would have to overcome that hurdle before he could move on. Right? Well, yeah, go ahead, Jenny.
Another thing I was going to say is where they were at in terms of their spectrum of faith.
Yeah.
I think we always think that it's got to be the Peter who is the know-it-all. I mean, but you've also, when you think about that, you've got, basically the one who doubted.
Yeah.
Where that's a skeptic.
It
Right?
is.
He's still figuring it out. And
It's true.
And yet there was a role that he could play.
Yeah.
Figuring it out.
And did these 12 men have it all figured out regarding Jesus and his kingdom?
Not at all.
When did they figure it out?
After he died and rose.
In Acts chapter 2. In Acts right. And they even had some biases. Like Peter ends up getting rebuked later on for his bias against Gentiles. And so like these aren't perfect men, but they're teaching what they know as they're learning it. Okay? And they believe that, most importantly, they believe that Jesus is who he claims to be to the point of knowledge that they have. And then as they learn more, they teach differently. Okay?
Jesus is struggling with his material.
Yeah. He was struggling with the way money was being used, and he was stealing. And no, we're not encouraging moral compromise in teachers, but he was not a perfect man.
He seemed to be not sure who Jesus was either.
Yeah. Yep.
And John,
Yeah, that's right.
the baby of the group.
What was the same about them? Okay.
Hand selected.
In Jesus, if you look at Acts chapter 1, where they're having to replace Judas, and they talk through the qualifications of an apostle, what were some of the key factors to be considered?
Believers.
Okay, they had to be an eyewitness. They were obviously believers. And they had to have been among the disciples from a certain period of time. Like they came and went from us during here to here in the ministry of Jesus. Okay? So these were men that came to Jesus, and you see that especially like in the Gospel of Mark, where they're inviting each other. Hey, I found the Messiah. Hey, I found the one. And they start bringing each other to Jesus. And then from that group, Jesus picks the 12. So like Jesus didn't just arbitrarily go out and pick 12. He picked 12 from among men that saw him as the Messiah. Does that make sense? There was some previous conviction before Jesus appointed them. How does this relate to the 4 C's? What do we know about these men as it relates to care, consciousness, courage, and craft?
What do you mean by craft?
Have you ever heard a teacher and like he just doesn't even know what he's doing? He's just up there wasting 45 minutes to waste 45 minutes. Yeah, it has to do with his skill. You know, some teachers have less skill than others. Some people have trained more than others, and you can see, right? And no matter what level of skill somebody has, they can always learn to do better. They can always improve, right? And that's something to say about teachers in general. So did every disciple, did every apostle have the same level of skill to teach? Okay, so you had a variety of skills. Did these men have courage to say what needed to be said? I think so. And Jesus kind of reinforced them more when he sent them out. Were they more aware as they looked for people? Like, who's paying attention? Is there anyone in this town looking? Did they have a consciousness and awareness of people looking for Jesus? I think they had to. Like, isn't that what Jesus was trying to teach them about when he said, hey, go into all these cities, when he sent them out 2 by 2? And he sent the 12, but he sent a total of 72 out. And he said, go into a town, and if they receive you, fine, stay there. But if they don't, knock the dust off your sandals and move on. And what Jesus was teaching them was, as you go into a town, be looking and be aware of, are they receptive or are they not? And if they're not, make a distinction and move on looking for someone who is. That's a consciousness awareness thing, right? He's saying don't force yourself on someone that doesn't want to hear it. Find people that do. What about care? Were the apostles men that had care for others? All right. And think about like in the early days, as the brothers were running around, hey, I found him. Hey, I found him. And it was because they loved the people they were talking to. They wanted them to be included in the kingdom too. So you see those four qualities with these men. All right. You want to keep reading? Somebody tackle verses 5 through 6, please. Read 5 through 6.
These 12 Jesus sent out, instructing them, go nowhere among the Gentiles and enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel.
Okay. Jesus placed some initial limitations on the 12 and where they were supposed to go. Why did he place these limitations on them?
The people that needed it the most, maybe.
Okay.
Lost sheep.
Yeah, so what is the first limitation? Maybe we should start with that. Yeah, Jews and Gentiles. So stay focused. I just want you to focus on Jews. Don't worry about going out to the Gentile towns. Okay, why was that his mark? Why? Did Jesus not care about Gentiles? Okay.
I think it's their sphere of influence.
The scriptures foretell us.
Okay, the scriptures did foretell that. Jenny is saying it might have to do with their sphere of influence. Okay. Like, Jews and Gentiles didn't have a whole lot to do with each other yet. And Jesus started to break that barrier down during his ministry. Jesus did heal some and perform some miracles for a very limited number of Gentiles that are recorded for us. And he went into some of the Gentile towns, that's recorded for us. So like the man who had legion, he was living outside of the Decapolis, which was a Gentile area. So odds are really high that was a Gentile guy. Jesus repeatedly would say it's not time. It's not time. So the Messiah came to Israel, and he was going to be rejected by Israel. And then when you read through Acts, you see the focus in the first 8 chapters especially being on Jerusalem and around Israel. But then the gospel starts getting taken outside of that, and God is making the point to everybody that the gospel is for all. So you've got the conversion of Cornelius in Acts chapter 10, right? And then it spreads and spreads and spreads until it gets to Rome. So part of it is, for these 12, in the chronology of God's plan, they're living in the peace where Jesus has not been rejected by the Jews yet. Jew and Gentile distinction is still present. They're still under the first covenant. And so there are some restrictions on them. Are those restrictions on us today? They're not. But what are some limitations that Jesus might give us as we started? What are some wise limitations he might put on us? Or what are some wise limitations we might put on someone starting out teaching and reaching out?
Dust your feet off after a few minutes.
Okay, so be conscious and be aware. Don't force yourself on others. That's true.
I think it's the same thing as what they were doing to the Jew person, to the Gentiles.
Yeah.
You got to kind of look at it as like, go ahead and people that do have some belief,
Yeah.
put them first, they will be easier to convert,
Okay.
and then get as many of those people working in God's work to be able to start flooding the area, I guess. To
Yeah.
keep on going off.
Yeah, I agree with that. Think about Jenny's point about sphere of influence deal. Let's say you've got a 13, 14-year-old, they become a Christian, and they're like, oh, I've got to preach the gospel. That means someone needs to get me a plane ticket and drop me off in deepest, darkest Africa, and I don't know any language but English, and I've never taught anything, but I've got to go. Is that the best way for a 13, 14-year-old to start? What might we tell that enthusiastic young person?
Use your sphere of influence. Use those that you can easily reach out to. You have that
Okay.
connection.
Start at school. Yeah, start at school with your friends. Or if you're working at Dutch Brothers, start with the folks that you're working with. And what about some of your family? And someone's like, I need to become a preacher. Well, that's great. How about we start with Wednesday night invitations? Let's start with something small, 5 minutes in front of a very friendly audience. Like, no one is going to throw tomatoes at you here, okay? We all love you. We want you to do well. We probably already agree with anything you may say. This is a place to get warmed up, okay? So, thinking through, Jesus might give some initial limitations to us to get us started and to help us grow, all right? Let's read 7 and 8.
And proclaim as you go, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse lepers, cast out demons, receive without pain, give without pay.
Okay, can we do those things today? Okay, I have personally never seen anyone do these things today. Talking about miraculous gifts of the Holy Spirit. What we see in Acts is that those were miraculous gifts passed on or given to people through the laying on of the apostles' hands. The apostles are all dead. No one has received those gifts currently today. But what's the principle that Jesus is saying to those folks in the first century? What's the principle at the end of verse 8? Okay.
Find out what they need.
Yeah, you have received without paying, give without pay. Some English versions will say you have freely received, freely give. We may not have freely received miraculous spiritual gifts, but are there some gifts that God has blessed each of us with?
Yeah.
What are they? What could some of those gifts be?
Monetary.
It could be money. It could be our houses. It could be our vehicles, our time, our health. Maybe it's a trailer. Maybe it's a pickup truck with a bed, and someone at church that doesn't have a pickup truck, and they need to pick up something from Lowe's, and so you go help them out with that. It's a form of hospitality. It sure is. And what you're acknowledging is all of those gifts from God are demonstrations of God's grace. And so I need to pass that grace along to other people. And we can all do that. We all just need to be a little bit more aware. What are some of the gracious gifts I've gotten from God that I can be hospitable with toward others?
And you can let your light shine by doing those for not just people from church.
Yes.
But your neighbors.
Yes.
Show that you're caring, and when they ask,
Yes.
you might lead right into why you do what you do.
100%. Have all of you heard about our new neighbors next to our property? I'm going to brag on them for a second. They actually texted Anna on our way here. So these are the folks that live behind the property where we're working on building our house, right? And we've had the property out there for a while. And Anna moved her garden out there as soon as we landed in May. But we didn't have any water at the property. And we were talking with the neighbors, and what they offered to do, they said, hey, we know you're not living out here yet, but Anna's garden needs water. And they're like, we've got some hoses. Do you have some hoses? You can hook up to our front porch and run 300 feet of hose to your garden and water your garden as much as you want. And never charged us for the water bill. That's really gracious of them. And they've been super kind. And we've tried to show that toward them as well regarding some things. Super sweet people. But that's an example of hospitality and generosity, right? And they have a faith. They've talked about their faith in God and the Bible, and they like all of our spiritual posts that we put on Facebook, right? And it's that kind of stuff. We can do that kind of stuff with our neighbors, right? Okay. Let's keep going. Let's look at verses 9 and 10.
Do not acquire gold or silver or copper money dealt for a bag for your journey, or even 2 coats or sandals for a staff, for the worker is worthy of his support.
So that means that preachers are supposed to be hobos, right? We don't think about anything. We don't keep track of our checking account. We just go out and go. Is that what that's saying? Okay. What is it saying?
Don't worry about it.
God's gonna take care of you.
Okay, that's not the priority. That is not your priority. It's not saying be bad stewards. It's saying to keep your priorities straight, right? And that whatever the lack is, God's going to take care of that. So what might a modern example of that look like?
Mormons.
Okay, explain. Rob, explain.
I was thinking, maybe I'm not answering the question correctly, but I was thinking about Mormon, these young men, elders.
Yeah. Elaborate.
They literally take this, I think.
Yeah.
They walk or ride their bicycles on their missions.
Mm-hmm.
They have a backpack, probably a single set of clothes.
Okay.
They're looking for, they're doing that.
Yeah.
Is what they're doing. I know.
Yeah. No, you're totally fine. You're totally fine. I'll give you another example. I know of very few, so I'm going to be very careful in what I'm about to say. I have heard of just a couple of preachers that are super selective about the gospel meetings they hold, where they go, and how much they get paid for them. And that's a certain approach. Like they want to know up front what a congregation may offer them for half of a week or a week's worth of work before they fly in and fly out. And let's exaggerate it. They could be like superstars that are like, I only want yellow M&Ms on my coffee table, and I want Aquafina water, and I want blah, 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 blah. And they could do that. What's the opposite end of that spectrum? Okay, I'm going to go, and I'm going to show up, and I'm going to work, and I don't know what you're going to support me. I don't need to know that ahead of time. Like, whatever you support me. There are some evangelists from a generation ago that the way they were supported was through, like, livestock and chickens, and that's what folks could afford to support them, and so that's what they supported them with. Right? And I think we need to have more of that mentality. Should we be charging people for evangelistic studies? No. We try to make a distinction when folks visit us here and the collection plate goes around. Like, you are not obligated to give us money because you're in this building. That's not what it's about. Okay? So as we teach and preach, we need to be thinking about that too. Now, Paul talks about, as a full-time evangelist and apostle, Paul received outside support. The Philippians sent him financial support multiple times. But there were some instances where Paul refused to receive money, like from the Corinthians, because they weren't spiritually mature enough for it. Like, he wouldn't even ask them to send him anything. And I think that's great that he made that kind of distinction, right? It's not about money. It's not about stuff. Okay? What are some ways, he doesn't have this written down, what are some ways that we could support people as they teach? Okay, encouragement.
Maybe give them gas money, maybe they can afford it.
Yeah. Maybe they need a gas card to help cover. Yeah, some food.
How far they're going.
I know a couple of guys. This is actually becoming a popular thing, and I think it's great. There are guys that meet in a lot of coffee places because that's where people are, and they try to get studies in coffee shops, right? If they're doing that, and if they're conscientious about, hey, I'm taking up a seat and I'm using Wi-Fi in a business, then what should I probably do while I'm here for 2 or 3 hours? Get some coffee or something, which means they're going to be spending money. So what could you do for them? Let's get them some cards. Let's get them some gift cards for the coffee shop, right? That sort of thing. thinking about what you can do to support them. And I would even say be thinking about how you can encourage elders, and how can you encourage deacons, and how can you encourage the teachers of our local congregation. Sending them thank you cards and acknowledging the work that they're doing and trying to keep them going. All right?
Your ability maybe to help lighten the load,
Yeah.
burden back at home.
Yes.
So
Yes.
maybe that's your skill.
Yeah. And I gave the example last class of the friend of mine who was a fantastic Bible teacher and preacher who only slept like 4 hours a night. But he was not very handy when it came to the house. And so there were some friends that did a fix-up day at his house while he was out of town on a foreign trip. And I was a part of that crew, and that was insanity. Because you had guys trying to work carpentry jobs who had never touched a hammer in their lives. His house was better when we were done, but that was a way to support him in his teaching and preaching, right? I know another example of an evangelist that was super, super responsible with his finances. He was a good steward, and he was trying to stretch his vehicle, but it was getting more and more costly to fix it up. And so there were some folks that were like, hey, you're using this to reach people and drive and whatever, and they bought him a car. And they're like, you don't need to have a car payment. You're trying to get your family around. Here's a vehicle. And it wasn't solicited, never asked for. It was just a demonstration of appreciation for this guy and to keep him going, right? So some creative ways like that. Let's look at 11 through 15. Someone want to read that? So the question is, why is it so hard to move on sometimes?
I think that's kind of a gray line there. At what point do you say,
Yeah.
okay, enough is enough,
Yep.
and forget about them?
Yeah. Do you ever forget about them? Yeah, he's not saying forget about them. Yeah. Yep.
And maybe the timing is not right for them. God
That's
has
true.
more to do in their heart.
That's true. What are some passages that might give you wisdom in deciding that it might be time to move on?
That's not your first line.
Yes? Okay, we're told not to. But how do you make the decision that that's the category that person falls into? Okay. Yeah.
They just don't open up, they don't listen,
Yeah.
they want to do their own thing, they're not ready.
So you've made repeated attempts, but they've repeatedly shown you that they're not interested. Okay, I agree with that.
Parable of the sower is an
Mm.
interesting one to point to, because you can kind of then distinguish where is a person. Like,
Yeah.
is it that they're literally, I mean, it's just falling by the wayside? Is it the cares of the world? Like,
Yeah.
it helps you back to the seasons of being able to say what's in the way,
Yeah.
and then looking for, frankly, a more opportune time.
There you go. That's really good. You gonna say something?
The prodigal son.
Yeah.
The father had,
Yeah.
I imagine, it was heartbreaking
Mm.
to see his son go. But he had the wisdom to let since his son was rejecting his home, he respected his decision.
Yeah. That's really good. And I want to say right off the bat on this topic that it can be easy or maybe convenient to look at somebody and make that distinction before you even talk to them. To say, oh, well, they would never hear it anyway. Or their heart is already hard, so why throw the seed out there? And so you come up with excuses to not engage them at all. That's not what this is talking about. This is talking about you have gone, you have attempted. So for the disciples, they had to go into the town and start speaking and start preaching about the kingdom of Jesus, right? So the assumption is you have tried. But there's some elements in what you all have said in the passages that you've mentioned. The first is this, free will. They have free will, just like you have free will. God's created everybody with free will. And it is not within your ability or power to override their free will. So if they're going to choose what they're going to choose, and God's going to respect their free will, you need to respect their free will. Now, that doesn't mean that's fun. Doesn't mean it's pleasant. What I've had explained to me, and I've experienced it too, it's like watching a car wreck in slow motion, and you can't stop it. You don't have any control over that. Like, you've done what you can do, and hopefully you continue praying. But at the end of the day, you have to let them make their choices. Okay, so that's the free will part of it, which I think is a major part of it. Another one, I think, goes over to something that really convicted me. Is it 2 Timothy? I'm going to jump over to 2 Timothy real quick. And you all have probably heard me mention this in sermons or classes, or you will. 2 Timothy chapter 2. Have you heard me tell the story of my young friend in high school? Okay, so when I first started preaching, I was 20 years old, and there was a young family at our church that had 3 teenage sons. And the oldest one was 16, 17 when I moved there, and I got to be there for his graduation. His senior year of high school, he got caught up with some bad people, some bad friends, barely graduated, started making some mistakes. Internet was still fairly new. Some social media stuff was still fairly new. As soon as he graduated, met some woman in California, took his car, drove all the way out to California to move in with this lady. All of us told him not to. So he left the Lord, moved to California, moved in with this lady. A couple months later, like it was the prodigal son. He was broke up with a girl, car was broken. He was in California, we were in Indiana. He had to get home. There were some other lifestyle choices he had made. Came back really repentant. I think he was sorry for his circumstances. As soon as things stabilized at home, he went back to the bad friends from school, moved in with somebody really bad. Like one of his roommates died from an OD, and so his dad and I went to talk to him. And our church did not have elders. It was just Jeremy in his early 20s as the preacher and the men. And so his dad and I went to his apartment one day to talk to him, and it did not go well. Like, he was just going to do what he wanted to do. He probably wasn't even sober. And he was really lippy with his dad. And so I got kind of intense. I got really intense, like warning him and pleading with him. And at one point, like, I don't remember everything I said, but one thing I remember saying was, I want to hit you. I said, I want to hit you right now. And like, I had never said that to anyone. And his dad looked at me like, Jeremy just said he wanted to hit a guy. But that was not right for me to say. That was not right for me to say. Now, later, somebody taught me something about these verses, and I had to go back and apologize to that young man. Okay? So 2 Timothy 2, verse 24, the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone, able to teach, patiently enduring evil, correcting his opponents with gentleness. You are not being gentle when you say you want to hit someone. Okay? But look at that. Verse 24 and that first phrase in verse 25, that is all my responsibility. That's what is within my control to do. When I stand before God, God's going to ask me, Jeremy, did you avoid being quarrelsome? Were you kind to him? Were you able to teach? Did you patiently endure his evil? Did you correct him with gentleness? That's all he's going to ask out of me. And then the rest of it, God may perhaps grant them repentance leading to a knowledge of the truth, and they may come to their senses and escape from the snare of the devil after being captured by him to do his will. The rest of it is on God and the individual. Is God going to do his part? I need to do my part. God is definitely going to do his part. But then I have to let the other individual do their part. Right? So the free will thing is really big, but I need to believe something else. Like when I make a determination, hey, this just isn't going anywhere, it doesn't have to be me. I need to acknowledge, hey, I've done what I can do, and it's obvious this isn't working, or you're not ready, or this, like at the time, like I don't know what it is, but we need to just take a break from this. And if you ever change your mind, let me know. If you want to pick this up again, let me know. If you want to come back, let me know. And when I step back, God's going to use somebody else, and God's going to use himself. God's not done working on them. It's just I'm not in the picture right then. I'm stepping back, and I have to trust that God is still working. And that's hard to do, especially the closer you are to that person and the more emotionally connected. It's hard to let go of the wheel and step back and trust that God still got it. But he does. Does that make sense? So I think everything that we've talked about is true. I need to look at what their actions are showing me. I need to just take them at face value, and then I need to respect their free will and respect God's providence and just let that work, because God has somebody else for me to work on and to work with. There's that factor too. Like I need to let go of that and focus somewhere where they will respond.
Gary, there's a level of intenseness, though.
Yeah.
Versus Jesus and the money changing ticket.
Yeah.
Rooting out the sin.
Yes.
He doesn't attack
Right.
them, but there's definitely some urgency and intensity.
Yes. Yes. Now, let's be clear. Depending on the circumstances, if I see someone being hurt or there's a dangerous circumstance, I'll jump in and I'll do what needs to be done to keep people safe. But just telling some 19-year-old kid that I'm upset with them, that was not okay. All right. And I did. I ended up going back and apologizing to that young man, and he did not even remember the conversation, which is another point. If they're not sober, don't talk to them. If they're not sober, they can't think straight. So you need to help them get clean and dry before you try to reason with them, or you're just going to frustrate yourself and them. That's just a free tidbit. All right. Thank you for class.